The states that have medical marijuana programs have 25% fewer deaths from prescription narcotics than those who don't. That's 10 to 15 Americans a day that are not dead because of medical marijuana.
It's time to consider cannabis. I'm your host, Curtis. What makes you a believer? Are you a believer? What would it take to make you become a believer? Do you have to see it? Do you have to touch it? Or must you hold on to it and really study it? For you to believe it be true, what would it take? Video evidence? The testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses? Or must it be something that you experience yourself? Eventually, we all put our faith into something. Some put their faith into medicine and science. Some people put their faith in their own strength and determination. And some people put their faith into God. Now, I don't care which category you fall under or where you put your faith. Maybe it's a couple places. All I care about is that you keep your mind open enough to allow yourself the opportunity to grow. And right now is one of those opportunities. Join me as we sit down with Dr. Josh Short of Stillwater Medicine. Stillwater Medicine is located in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio. If you'd like to make an appointment, visit stillwatermedicine.com and submit a completed pre-scheduling form. Not sure if you're ready to make that step yet? That's all right. Let's sit down with Dr. Short and consider cannabis together. Joshua, hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Well, my name is Josh Short. I'm a medical doctor with a medical marijuana consulting business in Ohio. My background is both in emergency medicine and integrative medicine, and then I have some experience working in the medical marijuana field while I was a physician in Oregon.
What got you into the medical field in general, not necessarily medical marijuana, but just into medicine?
I was working as a river guide in West Virginia. The company that we worked for paid for all of their guides to become wilderness first responders, and they set up all these great kind of mass casualty and disaster scenes in the woods, and it was fascinating. Like the process of organizing and extracting people from unsafe situations just really blew my mind. And from there, I became an EMT, and the more I got into emergency medical services, the more emergency medicine became the thing that was calling me. So I got into emergency medicine and love it, and really see Western medicine as being powerful and useful in the emergency room. But as time has gone on, I've also kind of gotten aware of some of its limitations.
So how long have you been in the medical field?
I have been a physician for 15 years. A practicing emergency physician for 12 of those.
And how did medical marijuana get on your radar?
Well, so I was working in Kentucky as an emergency medical physician where there's never been any type of legal marijuana whatsoever. But certainly in the whitewater scene and around, there was marijuana everywhere, and people were talking about it and talking about what they thought it was useful for. But then when I moved to Oregon, which had a medical marijuana program, and I had patients in the ER saying things to me like, hey, I'd rather not have that pain medicine. I'd rather you write my letter for medical marijuana. I really didn't know what to say. I didn't have any experience with it or using it as a medicine. I got curious about it and started a free medical marijuana business in Oregon just because I kind of wanted to learn more, and I also wanted to feel really comfortable telling people no.
Right.
If it didn't seem appropriate, and really got the bulk of my education from my patients. At that time, people came in and told me what they were using for different things, different preparations that they were using, and just were really open with me about how they were using cannabis as medicine. That kind of got me thinking about some of the limitations I mentioned in Western medicine, and I ended up getting board certified in integrative medicine, which is a little bit more embracing of some of the non-pharmacologic strategies, and that pushed me to learn more about medical marijuana. When I moved back to this side of the country, there really wasn't an opportunity to do medical marijuana because it's still illegal here. And so when I found out that Ohio was going to be permitting it, I started pursuing starting a business here because I missed the work.
So you're living in North Carolina?
Yeah, I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I do emergency medicine work. I do travel work. So I bounce around to a lot of different hospitals in Western North Carolina, some in Kentucky. I've worked up here before. And then I'm up here about a week a month for the purposes of medical marijuana.
Do you enjoy not being tied down to a specific office or practice and being able to go wherever?
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a nice little camper van, and I like to travel around and stay different places and work at different places. When I was doing emergency medicine for a while, I spent a time being a full-time guy and got into administration and was the director for an emergency room in the local EMS system. And it was good work, but it was hard, and it was taking too much time away from family. So that's kind of pushed me to get into a little bit more flexible arrangement, which is travel work.
As you've learned more about medical marijuana, what have you learned about the endocannabinoid system?
Not as much as I'd like because there isn't good information. I've certainly read everything that I can about what's there, but you've got to remember that this is a system that we essentially discovered in the mid-90s. So our experience with it is very limited, and because marijuana remains a Schedule I substance by the DEA, research is essentially prohibited. So what we know about the endocannabinoid system has been largely hampered by the federal government's stance that marijuana has no medical value, even though the federal government holds a patent on medical marijuana for the treatment of brain injuries. So there's a lot of just conflicting legislation that makes good research with marijuana hard to come by. What I think I know about the endocannabinoid system is that, unlike so many of our other regulatory systems that we try to address with Western medicine, where we see a disturbance and we try to push it back one direction. For example, if you have a pneumonia, we try to take that infection and push it back with an antibiotic and get your immune system to drive that process in one direction. The endocannabinoid system seems to be a regulatory system that drives the other systems towards midline and towards homeostasis. So what the research seems to indicate to me is that by supporting the endocannabinoid system, you support all of the systems returning to what is their intended or most functional baseline. And so it's kind of a rare opportunity pharmacologically to support a system that supports other systems. And it may be one of the reasons that cannabis can address so many different conditions, is that it potentiates healing itself based on some of the research that's out there. I'd like to see better research.
Wow. Yeah. I've just been digging into it, and there's not a lot of information, and it is really too bad that our government doesn't allow more study on it. Walk us through the medical recommendation process. What could a patient expect as they walked into Stillwater Medicine?
Let me back up just a step before what they expect when they come in the door, because there's a lot of conflicting information about Ohio's medical marijuana program.
Sure,
right
yeah,
now.
absolutely.
A little over 2 years ago, Ohio said that, hey, we're going to have a medical marijuana program. It has to be open by September 8th, 2018. And at which point law stipulated that doctors could begin recommending medical marijuana and that patients would be able to purchase it in state-run dispensaries. So the physician component of the law is active. In other words, I can now recommend that a patient use medical marijuana. However, the growers, processors, and dispensaries are lagging behind. And so right now, although I can recommend that somebody use medical marijuana, they cannot legally purchase it. So at this point, we're in a little bit of limbo because a patient can see a physician who can then recommend medical marijuana, but we don't know when the dispensaries are going to be open or when they'll be able to purchase it. As far as with our company, Stillwater Medicine, you would visit our website, We have some criteria that we ask you to attest to before you make an appointment, with the goal of really not wasting your time and money if we don't think that it's appropriate for you. You know, there are some risks with marijuana and a prior history of any type of schizophrenia or psychosis. There are some definite risks under the age of 21. There are risks to pregnant women. And so we do ask that you attest to a list of criteria before applying for an appointment. In fact, you can't apply for an appointment until you've met those criteria. But once you've met those criteria, you would pick an appointment available on our schedule and come in and see us. And you would see either me or my partner, Dr. Pope. We would review your records. You don't need a referral from your doctor, but your doctor needs to be aware that you're using medical marijuana. You don't want to ever keep your doctor's secret from one another.
Yeah.
And if you have a doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, anybody that wants to coordinate with us, we're happy to talk to them. In fact, we prefer it when people are already engaged in some type of wellness pursuit, whether that's Western medicine, osteopathic medicine, naturopath, chiropractor, whoever's really taking care of you. We're happy to coordinate with them and integrate cannabis into that in a way that we think safe. Our primary focus is on pain management. As an emergency room doctor, the perils of narcotic pain medicine are too apparent to me.
Yeah.
The states that have medical marijuana programs have 25% fewer deaths from prescription narcotics than those who don't. That's 10 to 15 Americans a day that are not dead because of medical marijuana. So a big push for us is trying to get people off of narcotics and sedatives and try to get them treating their pain with a combination of wellness activities like acupuncture, meditation, and cannabis, which works great for pain. Oh, so to continue with what to expect, we review your records. We conduct a brief physical exam. We talk about what you're doing for your wellness. We talk about your experience or not with marijuana in the past. And then we try to make recommendations based on CBD to THC ratios, depending on what type of effects you're trying to get, certain terpene profiles, milligrams, frequency of use, interactions with other medications, standard doctor type stuff.
It seems like you kind of try to weed out people that would not qualify, but how often do you end up not giving a letter of recommendation?
Rarely. I don't, our exclusion criteria are pretty broad. The Hippocratic Oath, the very first thing in it says, first, do no harm. And I think it's hard to do harm with marijuana, but I certainly don't want to cause any harm. So we do exclude quite a few people before they come in the door. And so the rare instance of having to not give somebody a card is unfortunately somebody who's kind of tried to manipulate the system or attest to things that aren't true. And, a review of their records or a thorough history kind of reveals some inconsistencies, in which case I'm typically too concerned to give a card.
Right. Do you ever have someone coming in wanting to consult with you, but who haven't made up their mind that this is what they want?
I do. When I worked in Oregon, my first round of patients were mostly younger athletes with some overuse injuries or things that they were tired of taking too much ibuprofen for, or things they definitely didn't want to take narcotics for. And then my second wave of patients was all of their parents.
Right.
And their parents frequently were from the generation where marijuana was so taboo that they were really reluctant to try it, and they were very hesitant to experience any of the cognitive or psychoactive effects. They didn't want that.
Right.
And so being able to talk to them about CBD dominant strains and certain ratios that would give them access to some of the anti-inflammatory and analgesic effects of marijuana without the cognitive disturbance felt like a useful thing to do. It felt like I was giving people the power to make some decisions. And usually with enough information, they were comfortable trying things that they did not expect to impair them from their standpoint, including, like topical creams, ointments. A lot of times they'd be receptive to using that. And generally they would find good benefits with it.
Oh, that's great. One of the things I hope to come out of this podcast, not specifically just this one, but the entire endeavor would be to help change some minds. There's a lot of conservative people who are from the generation of reefer madness, and they don't want anything to do with cannabis.
I'll tell you an interesting story. A patient called me the other day and said that they went to their doctor and wanted to have their doctor recommend medical marijuana because they wanted to try to decrease the number of narcotics they were taking. And the physician told them, that he wasn't comfortable doing that. You say, what's so crazy about that? But if you start thinking about it, he is prescribing her prescription narcotics, which right now are the leading cause of death under the age of 50 in the United States. 46 Americans dead a day from prescription narcotics. 0 people dead from marijuana ever.
Yeah.
And yet somehow in our system, we've gotten so entrenched in the idea that pharmaceuticals are the answer, that there's physicians who are more comfortable with the most deadly drug we have in our culture than they are with marijuana, which has never hurt anybody ever from a toxicity standpoint. Certainly there are dependency issues and, codependency issues, but marijuana as a substance has never killed a human, as far as we know. Maybe a bale of it fell on somebody's head at some point.
Are most of the patients that you see already self-medicating with cannabis?
I'd say most of them are. It seems to be very different by age. Most folks under 40 have a greater comfort with marijuana than those, especially over 50. And then in the middle, it's just kind of half and half. But a lot of folks that are 50 and older have questions about its safety, about its interaction with other drugs, about how it's going to affect their thinking. And so a lot of times those folks maybe tried marijuana as a teenager, felt really strange, but now are curious about it as a medicine. But then under 40, most folks are familiar with it and use it regularly. But a lot of them are using recreational marijuana, which has largely had the CBD bred completely out of it. And so they're familiar with marijuana, but they're largely familiar with its psychoactive effects. They're not really familiar with it as a medicine or how to use it best as a medicine.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that they had gotten the CBD out of it altogether. That's interesting.
Unless you've bought marijuana that is labeled with a percentage of CBD at a dispensary somewhere, you probably have rarely ever had CBD in marijuana. When marijuana prohibition really happened, the indoor THC Afghani strains that they started to breed, they bred for THC content, and they did that at the extent of CBD. And that really formed the bulk of recreational marijuana that was available in the United States. So in general, recreational marijuana does not have CBD.
Interesting. So what year was that?
70-ish.
Oh, the 70s.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When they really started to crack down on, on growing it.
So even when I tried it out of high school, I was not getting the full spectrum of cannabinoids.
Probably not. And the amount of THC in most recreational marijuana can be, it can be a ton of fun if that's what you're looking for, but it really is not something that's potentiating the anti-inflammatory or homeostatic effects that you get with CBD.
Wow. I've learned something today. Do you yourself use cannabis?
I do. CBD is legal in North Carolina. Medical marijuana is not, but I am pretty active and play pretty hard, and I get the chronic injuries that everybody gets, and I really prefer CBD to non-steroidals when I can get away with just CBD. There's a good study that showed the additive effect of CBD and non-steroidals was better than either alone, and so I've been trying that some lately, like 15 milligrams of CBD and a little bit of naproxen, and that seems to work well for acute intermittent pain. My wife is an integrative psychiatrist, and she prescribes a lot of her patients. I say prescribe. She recommends the use of CBD in a lot of her patients for social anxiety. Most of her patients are adolescent to early adult females, and has really good results with it without the side effects of a lot of the common anti-anxiety medicines that most psychiatrists are prescribing. So that's her experience is more on the anxiety side. I like it for just strains and groans.
Yeah, I love it for anxiety. If anyone tells me they have anxiety, I immediately say, you should try CBD.
Well, we know it works. I mean, the data shows that it works. And it works more safely than almost anything that exists. So it's hard to, worst case scenario with CBD, your wallet ends up a little bit lighter. There are some people it doesn't help as much, but there are no side effects and no danger.
Do you believe that it has a place outside of a medicinal purpose?
I do. I think with the multitude of stressors and sort of inflammatory insults you encounter by being a modern day American, supporting these systems that can kind of move you back to middle can be pretty important, especially if you can do so in a way that's safe and doesn't have side effects.
So we talked a little bit about letters of recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
So my doctor told me that my letter of recommendation acts as affirmative defense if I'm caught with cannabis product on me. Is that true?
It can. Affirmative defense was the system put in place prior to the creation of the medical marijuana laws. And it does offer you some protection for the use and possession of marijuana on a case-by-case basis. It's not a blanket shield against prosecution the way the card is intended to be.
Gotcha.
So that is a vestige of the pre-medical marijuana system. It is not equivalent to having a card.
Right.
Until the patient registry is open, there are no cards. Once the patient registry opens, which will be 60 days prior to the dispensaries open, then you can get an official Ohio medical marijuana card, which does protect you completely for the possession and use in the amounts and places stipulated by the law.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, I say all of this not as an attorney. This is based on my conversations with the Ohio Medical Board and the medical marijuana program so that I can understand what to tell people correctly. So that letter is helpful, but it is not the extent of help that a card will be when they're available.
Yeah, I remember seeing a video on Facebook about people who were arrested coming back from Michigan. The doctor apparently gave them cards that said medical marijuana card or something as part of their package. And
if a doctor tells you that they can offer you protection from the law for the use or possession of marijuana in Ohio, that is not true until the patient registry opens. Like in the case of our business, we take your information, we keep it, we file it the day the registry opens, but until then you do not have a card. And there is no physician that can give you additional protection from the law for the use of possession of marijuana.
I know you're not a lawyer, so I understand if you don't know the answer to this, but when it comes to like medical marijuana cards and letters of recommendation, does CBD product fall under that?
Again, I can tell you what I think is true.
Okay.
So there's two contradictory laws when it comes to hemp products, which is that industrial hemp products are legal in the United States. You make something from hemp, you can sell that and do what you want with it. Products that contain THC are illegal. All industrial hemp has some tiny amount of THC, and so nobody knows which statute applies to what. In North Carolina, I can lose my license for telling a patient to use CBD because it's a Schedule I substance according to North Carolina, but they can walk down to the vape shop and buy it.
That makes a lot of sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So in Ohio, there's similar vagaries. There are some lawmakers who say that CBD is illegal, but it's being sold right and left.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Before we go, though, I'd like to know if there's anything that you'd like to make sure our listeners know before we wrap up.
The main message is something that we've already talked about briefly, but I'll reiterate, which is just that we in America are defining healthcare as access to pharmaceuticals. And healthcare is a lot more than that. It's the active cultivation of wellness, and that's something we are not really attending to as doctors or patients. That's the perspective we try to take, and I do think with the endocannabinoid system and its kind of homeostatic effect, there's a real role for cannabis in potentiating wellness. And it's certainly much safer than many of the antidepressants and pain medicines that are available now. So if I can get people to kind of rethink their choices when it comes to taking a pill or taking a plant, I'm really trying to push people towards taking a plant.
It seems simple enough, doesn't it? Pill or plant? Now, personally, I look to God for my salvation, the maker of the plant and not the plant. But when it comes to the question of pill or plant, I'm going to go with the plant. How about you? Are you still not convinced? Go to considercannabisnow.com and do a little exploring. You never know what you might learn. If you're interested in contacting Dr. Josh Short, you can email him at physicians.direct@stillwatermedicine.com. Ready to make an appointment? Go to stillwatermedicine.com and submit a completed patient pre-scheduling form. Consider Cannabis is in no way a part or form of Stillwater Medicine. This episode was in no way meant to diagnose any disease or recommend treatment for any illness. If you found anything in this episode of value, please share it. Pass it along to someone else so they can grow too. The only way to break the stigma is to continue the conversation. The more people who share their story of how cannabis has helped them in their health and wellness, the more they will have to listen. The more they listen, the more they'll begin to look. And as they watch us live our lives, they will see that we are not the stereotype. We are not thugs. We're not hooligans. We're not drug addicts. We're not criminals. We're everyday people trying to live our best life and to give our all in all the things that we want to do. We may not all come from the same upbringing or have the same advantages as the others, but we have that in common, that we want to take this short life and live it to its fullest, to give it our all. And I have found that cannabis helps me do that. It could do that for you too. So join me next time and we'll consider cannabis together.